It was a quiet afternoon in a small roadside cafe, the kind of place where people stopped for a quick meal and moved on. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and rain on the pavement. Then, the door swung open, and a young pregnant woman stepped inside, her face tired but calm. She smiled softly at the waiter and politely asked for a glass of water. But what happened next shocked everyone in the cafe. The waiter, clearly annoyed and impatient, rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. Moments later, in an act no one could understand, he splashed the water straight at her. The woman froze, water dripping from her hair, as the cafe went silent. Every eye turned toward her, expecting anger, shoutings, but she simply took a deep breath, holding her stomach protectively, and said nothing. The waiter smirked, unaware of the storm he had just invited into his life, because the woman he had just humiliated wasn't alone in this story. Outside, parked beside her motorcycle helmet, was a leather jacket marked with the insignia of one of the most respected biker groups in town. Within minutes, that door would open again. Heavy boots would echo across the floor, and the waiter, still proud of what he'd done, was about to learn who she really was. The cafe's calm would soon turn into chaos. But for now, the only sound was the soft ticking of the clock. Waiting for what came next, the woman slowly wiped her face with a napkin, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes stayed calm, too calm. The people around her whispered, unsure whether to step in or stay quiet. The waiter crossed his arms, pretending not to care, but a small trace of guilt flashed across his face. He didn't know her story. He didn't know that behind that gentle expression was someone who had lived through far worse than a rude waiter. Her name was Lily, and she had left behind the noise of biker rallies and endless road trips to build a peaceful life for her unborn child. But peace, it seemed, was never easy to keep. Outside, the distant rumble of motorcycles echoed faintly, like thunder rolling in before a storm. Lily's gaze flickered toward the window for a split second. She knew that sound familiar and close. Her husband Jack had promised her he'd just fill up gas and meet her here. He wasn't the kind of man people crossed twice. But right now, she didn't want him to walk in angry. She just wanted to forget this moment and leave quietly. The waiter, still trying to convince himself he was right, walked behind the counter and began to serve other customers. Yet every time he looked up, Lily's calm expression unsettled him. Something about her didn't fit the picture of a helpless woman. Outside, the motorcycles grew louder, their engines blending into one deep roar. And before anyone could react, the cafe door handle began to turn. The cafe door opened with a slow creak, and a gust of wind swept in. Everyone turned to see a tall man in a worn leather jacket step inside, water dripping from his boots. His eyes searched the room until they landed on Lily. The moment their eyes met, she gave a tiny shake of her head, silently begging him to stay calm. Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. The sound of his boots echoed as he walked toward her table, his presence commanding the room without needing to raise his voice. The waiter stiffened, realizing who had just entered. Jack pulled out a chair and sat beside Lily, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, forcing a smile, but he could tell something had gone wrong. The tension in the air grew heavy. The waiter tried to busy himself behind the counter, pretending nothing had happened, though his heart thudded faster with every second. A few customers began to whisper, recognizing Jack from the local news, the leader of a biker group known more for charity rides than trouble. But Jack wasn't just a biker. He was fiercely protective of his family. He noticed the wet napkin, the untouched glass of water, and the uneasy silence around the room. Lily's eyes pleaded for restraint, but the truth was already written across his face. The calm before the storm was breaking. The waiter could feel it, that something was coming, something far bigger than a spilled glass of water. Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the waiter who now avoided looking his way. The cafe had gone silent. The hum of the ceiling fan, the only sound cutting through the heavy air. Lily's hand brushed against Jack's, a quiet reminder to stay calm. But the tension was too thick. The humiliation still fresh in his mind. He didn't need to hear the full story. He could see it written all over her face, in the way her clothes were damp and her eyes avoided his. Outside, more motorcycles pulled up, their engines rumbling like thunder gathering in the distance. One by one, riders stepped off, removing their helmets as they entered the cafe. The atmosphere shifted completely. Every customer froze, unsure of what was about to happen. The waiter's face turned pale as he realized the men were part of Jack's group. The same symbol stitched on his jacket gleamed on theirs. Jack stood slowly, his voice calm but steady. "Did someone here have a problem serving my wife?" he asked. The question wasn't loud, but it carried through the room like a warning. The waiter's hands trembled as he fumbled with a tray, trying to find words that wouldn't come. Lily's eyes darted between them, her heart pounding. She didn't want a scene, especially not now. But Jack's expression told her it was too late for that. The truth was about to come out, and the cafe was holding its breath for what would happen next. Before the waiter could stammer out an excuse, the cafe door opened again, this time revealing a woman in a business suit, clutching a small folder. She looked out of place among the leather jackets and heavy boots, but her sharp eyes went straight to the waiter. "Ethan," she said firmly, "we need to talk." The sound of her voice froze him. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Jack frowned, watching the strange woman walk toward the counter. Lily glanced between them, confused. The woman placed the folder on the counter, her tone low but cutting. You lied about your past, didn't you? I warned you this would catch up someday. Her words sent a wave of whispers through the cafe. Jack's men exchanged glances, unsure what was unfolding. The tension shifted, not just anger now, but confusion. Lily's brows furrowed as the woman opened the folder and revealed a set of photos. They weren't about Jack or his group. They were about Ethan, the waiter. In the photos, he was seen at a different cafe, involved in an old scandal where he had insulted another customer and lost his job. The realization spread quickly. Ethan hadn't changed his ways. He had just run away from his past and started over under a new name. Jack's anger slowly turned into something colder, disappointment mixed with disbelief. Lily looked at the frightened waiter and whispered, "Running never fixes what's broken." But outside, another sound grew louder. Sirens. Someone had called the police, and the tension was about to explode. The flashing red and blue lights painted the cafe windows as two officers stepped inside, their expressions cautious. Everyone fell silent, the tension thick enough to feel in the air. Jack's men slowly backed away, letting the police take the lead. The officer in charge looked around the room, then at the frightened waiter. "We got a call about a disturbance," he said. "What's going on here?" Before anyone could speak, the woman in the business suit stepped forward. "Officers," she began calmly, "this man, Ethan, is wanted for fraud at his previous job. I have the documents right here." Gasps filled the cafe. Ethan's face went pale as the officers took the folder and flipped through the evidence. He opened his mouth to protest, but his voice cracked under the weight of the truth. Jack glanced at Lily, his anger replaced by quiet relief. He hadn't needed to do anything. Justice was unfolding on its own. Lily gently squeezed his hand, her calm presence grounding him. The officers placed Ethan in handcuffs and began to lead him out. As they passed, he looked at Lily and whispered, "I didn't know who you were." She smiled faintly and said, "You didn't need to." The cafe began to breathe again, but just as Jack turned to comfort Lily, the businesswoman looked back and said, "You might want to thank your wife. She's the one who called us." Jack turned to Lily in surprise. She simply smiled, resting her hand on her stomach, and said softly, "Some lessons are better learned calmly."